This is Terry Leisure. The date today is March 24th, 2015. I have been trying to reactivate my Facebook account. Authorities have been repeatedly blocking and shutting down my Facebook account. They don't want me reporting the crimes that the Portland Police and County Sheriffs and their civilian operatives are guilty of. They have basically all I ever used my Facebook account for was to report publicly the crimes that the Portland Police and the Multnomah County Sheriffs are guilty of, and their civilian sting operatives are guilty of, and basically reporting the crimes that they've committed and chronologically reporting the serious crimes that these people were committing. And the police and county sheriffs and FBI and anybody and everybody that is a buddy to people in authority just gangs up on me and uses their organized tactics in order to prevent me from getting help. My 911 calls are covered up by the Portland Police. I've given up calling 911. It does not get help. It gets my wife's buddies and quite literally my wife's lover to my door, and they immediately put on a bush. They immediately start performing for video surveillance, and they ignore the content of my 911 call, and they pretend they're at my door for other reasons. In other words, that's how easily they cover up my 911 calls. If I call 911, that gets the Portland Police to my door. But it doesn't mean they're going to take my complaint. It means that they'll show up at my door and they'll immediately start performing for their own video surveillance. And they completely ignore the fact that I make a 911 call, and they'll immediately pretend that I'm some sort of a bad guy, that somebody else has called 911 against me over. So, and they've done this before. And I gave up calling 911 because it doesn't get help. Quite literally, the last time I called 911, it got 4 police officers to my door. One of them was Officer Eric Carlson, my wife's lover. The other 3 was his buddies, and they were grinning and smirking, thinking I didn't recognize him. And because they thought I didn't know what he looked like. My wife was trying to hide the fact, and my wife's daughters and my wife's coworkers were trying to hide from me what Officer Eric Carlson looked like. I already knew what he looked like. I seen him in January of 2005, and but they didn't realize that I knew this was the person that was having an affair with my wife, and they didn't realize that I knew that he was the one that they were going to be using as a double to set me up for shit. And they completely ignored. They responded to my 911 call, but when they showed up at my door, they were not recognizing and acknowledging my 911 call. Instead, they were putting on a pretense, pretending that somebody else called 911 on me, is what they were acting like, and they were demanding that I surrender my backpack to them. So they were completely ignoring the content of my 911 call as though it never occurred. And that's how they treat it. And they were doing this for the purpose of their own video surveillance. I was already surrounded by the Portland Police and by the Multnomah County Sheriffs via their sting operation tactics. They had all the apartments surrounding mine. It was a small apartment building, not this apartment building. This is a much, much larger apartment complex than where I previously lived. The place where I previously lived, it only had 8 apartments. one small building, and all the apartments there were one-bedroom apartments. They pretty much took over that entire building, and they had it filled with their undercover police officers and with their civilian operatives. And they seem to do a combination. They seem to prefer a combination of pretty much their undercover officers combined with their civilian operatives. And that's pretty much what they had me surrounded by. And they were quite literally, when I called 911 and my wife's lover and his buddies responded to my 911 call, they were immediately putting on a bullshit pretense, completely ignoring everything I said in my 911 call, and ignored why I'm calling 911, and instead put on a pretense of acting as though there's some sort of a complaint on me, and they were demanding that I surrender my backpack to them. Yeah, it's not this backpack. This is I got the same shit in this backpack that I had in that backpack, but it was a completely different backpack back then. I carried the evidence that I had of my wife's affair with Officer Eric Carlson, along with other evidence of their crimes, such as my wife's diary and love letter that Officer Eric Carlson's partner, Officer John Ray, planted in my home, of which I'm a witness to. He gained entry into my home by pretending to be a maintenance man, and I caught Officer John Ray planting a love letter in my apartment. I literally caught him in the act. He was pretending to inspect the fire alarms, which the fire alarms are like, you know, up on the ceilings. Well, he went into my bedroom and my wife's bedroom, and instead of looking up at the ceiling and examining and testing the fire alarm, he was bending over and had his arm inside a box that we kept all our clean clothes in, and he was stuffing a fucking love letter in that box. I quite literally caught him in the act of that. So I have that damn love letter that Officer John Ray of the Portland Police Department was planting in my home, of which I'm a witness to and can testify to, and testify to the fact that he's lying about who he is and what his profession is. And yeah, this is how police officers and county sheriff officers, this is how they gain illegal entry into people's homes. They just have their buddies, the apartment managers, introduce them as maintenance men, and that's how they gain entry, without any warrant or anything. And the motherfucker was planting evidence. Essentially, I have evidence of their, that backpack is essentially my wallet. I treat my backpack like it's my wallet. I always carry my laptop in my backpack, and I have made purchases via my laptop over the internet. So as far as I'm concerned, that laptop is a part of my wallet, and I will defend it as such. If some dumbass idiot thinks, oh, I have to surrender my backpack to them just because they request it, as far as I'm concerned, that's no different than asking for my wallet. It's no different. I keep my ID, my money. This laptop is an extension of my goddamn wallet, and they don't get to have it. Wallets have become bigger now that people have used laptops to make purchases and whatnot over the internet. So that's technically my goddamn wallet. I know my legal rights in regards to defending my wallet. But they were insisting I surrender my backpack to them. And the reason why was because I had all my evidence that I had on these people in my backpack. And my wife's fuck buddy, Officer Eric Carlson, wanted me to surrender all my evidence to him so he could make it disappear. I didn't give it to him. But I didn't let on that I knew he was Officer Eric Carlson, because I knew damn well they would have just shot me right then and there. If he'd have known that I knew at that moment that I recognized him, they would have just shot me and then just faked whatever for the news to justify it. but they thought I didn't know. I already knew he was a goddamn brunette. They didn't think I knew that, but I knew in January of 2005 that he was a brunette. They were trying to hide the fact that he was a Portland cop. He and his partners were sleeping around with my wife and her daughters. Basically, my wife started sleeping around with people in law enforcement when she got a job at the Multnomah County Jail kitchen as a prep cook. And she basically became a whore and sting op for the Portland Police and the Multnomah County Sheriffs. She became recruited as a civilian sting op for law enforcement. And a civilian sting op is essentially nothing more than anybody and everybody that lies for cops and will commit any crimes that cops want them to commit. That's essentially what a fucking sting op is. When they recruited my wife into this shit, by recruiting her into an affair, they turned my wife against me behind my back. My wife, in turn, had her side of the family on board with what she was involved with law enforcement. And the county sheriffs and the Portland police, basically the people that my wife were associated with at the time, made the decision they were going to get rid of me by framing me as a pedo. And my wife and her side of the family, behind my back, turned my daughters against me. And they recruited them into their sting operation. And they basically had the whole thing planned out. The county sheriffs, the Multnomah County sheriffs, made the decision they were going to set me up as a pedo. They told my wife to quit her job, to conceal her connections with authorities. And the same day my wife quit her job at the county jail kitchen is the same day the Multnomah County sheriffs filled out the paperwork to take over the surrounding apartments surrounding mine. And 3 days later, the county sheriff moved into the surrounding apartments surrounding mine. And they made arrangements the same day my wife quit to bring in a double. And they were making arrangements to get a double onto my property. They spent right after the county sheriff took over the surrounding apartments, they told my wife to take the family out of town for a day, and the county sheriffs broke into my home and bugged it while we were gone. And they told my wife to take the family out of town for a day so that they could do that. And when we came back from that day-long trip, I discovered not this apartment, but the apartment that we had back in 1999, the ceiling had a crack that went from one side of the wall all the freaking way to the other side of the wall. I mean, it was just a huge, long crack. I mean, it was so fucking blatant and obvious. I noticed it within 5 minutes after getting back home from that day-long trip. And my wife herself noticed it about a minute after I noticed it. When my wife noticed it, she was grinning from ear to ear, and she went and grabbed her cell phone, and she booked it into the bathroom. She didn't say a word to me about that crack in the ceiling. And she called up her sister, Vicky Rosales, and she was talking to her sister, Vicky Rosales, saying, "Yeah, they cracked the ceiling. Terry hasn't noticed it yet. Come on over, you got to see it." And then she hung up on her sister, and then she came out of the bathroom, and then she acted nonchalant and set her phone down and didn't say a word to me about the crack. So she was trying to hide it from me, and she already knew who the people that are responsible for cracking it, and it was their fuck buddies law enforcement that were right next door, and her sister was on board with all the shit, and she wanted her sister to come over and see it. I mean, this is how blatant this was. I mean, they weren't really trying very hard to hide it. They didn't even really care if I knew or suspected. They had the whole thing planned out. They thought I didn't know, and from that point forward, my wife was directing our daughters to perform for their video surveillance, and the county sheriffs that were right next door were quite literally paying my wife, Joan Wager, and her sister, Vicky Rosales, to turn my yard into a playground, and they did so within like 2.5 to 3 months. They quite literally turned my yard into a playground. They had multiple large swimming pools and a very large trampoline. And each of which costed over $350 each. Now, keep in mind, this is back in 1999. Minimum wage was less then than it is now, and my wife at the time was the only one working. She quit her job at the county jail kitchen, and then she claimed she immediately got a job at the airport doing more food prep work, where she was preparing meals that go on airplane flights. That kind of a job. Now, I don't know if she actually had that job or not. I suspect that technically she probably didn't, and that she was just lying about it. Because she was, after all, the entire time working for the county sheriffs, and she was trying to hide this fact from me. And the county sheriffs were funding her to turn my yard into a playground. And right after my wife and her family turned our yard into a playground, that's when the county sheriffs put a double on my property. And the county sheriff brought in their longtime favorites, the Dunham family, which have a very, very long history of murdering people and framing people for the Multnomah County sheriffs. And the Dunham family have been doing this kind of shit to people since the early 70s that I can testify to. And they brought in a Dunham family so that they could use their children to pose with that double the county sheriff brought in. So, and this is the reason why they brought in the Dunham family. They don't like the fact that I know. They're not happy about the fact that I know. The Dunham family were neighbors of mine when I was a kid growing up, and I witnessed the county sheriffs and the Dunham family framing a neighbor. And they were back in '71. I was only 6 years old at the time. It's way too damn young to understand what I was witnessing. But I witnessed the county sheriffs and the Dunham's family. They were framing a neighbor of ours that lived a block away from us as a pedophile. And the county sheriff officer was in their target's home. And the county sheriff officer was acting as a double. And he was impersonating the person that lived there. And the Dunham's family brought their children and rounded up neighbor children to bring to that area to pose with the county sheriff officer that was acting as a double. And it was the mother of the Dunham family, Darlene Dunham, who was snapping the photogenic photos of her children and the neighbor children, posing with this double. And this double was tossing out candy bars at the children. And Darlene Dunham was standing across the street with a Multnomah County Sheriff officer's camera and was snapping photogenic photos of it. The reason I know this is because I'm one of the children that Darlene Dunham, I'm one of the neighborhood children that Darlene Dunham rounded up to bring to that area for that purpose. And I was only 6 years old at the time, didn't know what the fuck was going on. I was told that Darlene Dunham was taking her children to the park, and that she was asking my mother if she could take me along with her children, and my mother agreed, thinking that Darlene Dunham was going to take me and her children to the park. Well, Darlene Dunham never took us to the park. She took us 1 block away to a neighbor's house where a county sheriff officer was inside the house waiting for Darlene Dunham to arrive. And when we got there, Darlene Dunham ordered me and the other children to cross the street and to go play in that yard. And she was pointing out the yard. So we went into the yard. You know, keep in mind, I'm only 6. I don't understand what the hell was going on at the time. I'm just doing what the adults told me to do. Technically, this person is babysitting me at this time, and I'm not, I don't question at the age of 6, I don't question my elders. When we got into the yard, the county sheriff officer that was inside the house opened the window that it's not his house. Keep that in mind. I didn't know that at the time. I found out later that it's not his house. But he opened the window. He was inside the house, and he opened the window, and he started tossing out candy bars to me and the other children, and to the Dunham's children. the Dunham's children immediately began grinning and smirking and laughing and were picking up the candy bars. And I was confused what was going on, because technically I'm not a part of this. I'm unaware of what's going on. I was confused. So I looked over, I didn't know, my mother told Darlene Dunham she could take me with her to the park. So I'm placed under Darlene Dunham's care. But I don't know who the hell this person is. And this person just started tossing candy bars at us. And I didn't know what I was supposed to do. So I looked over at Darlene Dunham and yelled over at her, am I supposed to pick these up? Because I didn't know. Because, I don't know who this person is. And my mother didn't, tell me to associate with whoever the hell this person was. So, I was asking what's going on. And that's when I noticed Darlene Dunham. She had a big-ass honking green all metal camera that took, and she was taking photogenic photos, and she was grinning from ear to ear. And she lowered the camera, and that's when I could see she was grinning from ear to ear. And she was yelling at me, to pick up the candy bars. So I'm like, oh, okay. So I started picking up candy bars, not really understanding what's going on. I had no understanding of what was happening. None of it made any sense to me. I was very confused. And this county sheriff officer just kept tossing out candy bars. Well, I happened to get I happened to get close enough to where I could see the dude, and he was in a county sheriff uniform. Now, keep in mind, I was only 6 years old. We didn't even have a TV when I was 6 years old. I don't think we got a TV until the very next year. I think it was 1972 when we ended up getting a TV. So I never really I didn't grow up with a TV and get used to even watching a TV until I was like 7 years old. Because we didn't have a TV when I was... So I didn't even know what the hell a county sheriff officer was. Keep in mind, I'm only 6. This is 1971. I'm only 6 years old. It's 1971. I don't even have a TV. I'm not familiar with people's uniforms or what the uniforms even mean or represent. I could see the dude was in a uniform. I saw what the uniform looked like, but I had no idea what the fuck it was or what he was. I mean, as far as I knew, he could have been an astronaut for all the hell I know. I didn't even know what the hell an astronaut was. I was only 6. We didn't even have a working TV, for Christ's sake. So I didn't even have commercials or anything like that to learn from or anything like that. Not until the following year. I mean, I'm not even in preschool or school yet, okay? I was very young, very confused, and I didn't understand what was going on. I just did. My mother told Darlene Dunham asked my mother if she could take me with her kids on a walk to the park. My mother agreed. I didn't know who the hell the Dunham family was, but apparently my mother knew who the hell they were. And that's basically what Darlene Dunham, told my mother as far as where she was taking me. So I was confused. I didn't understand why they weren't taking us to the park, and I was confused as to why we were taken to this house instead. And then all of a sudden, some dude is in a uniform is tossing candy bars at us, and I didn't understand what's going on, and I didn't understand. So I was constantly asking questions, but I wasn't getting really the answers that I wanted or needed. But because of this, I was very confused, and I didn't understand. This county sheriff officer was tossing these candy bars at us for about 5 minutes until he must have had at least 25 candy bars or something like that. And then he ran out and he said, "Okay, he's done," and then he shut the window. And as soon as he shut the window, that's when Darlene Dunham was yelling from across the street at her kids and at me to come back to her. So we went back to her, and then from this point forward, Darlene Dunham was taking me back home. And we're all basically heading back home. And from this, for that entire walk that Darlene Dunham and her children will walk as they're walking me back home, they were essentially talking about what happened, and we're celebrating. They were they were in celebration mode at this point, and they were all grins and smirks, and were laughing, and they were referring to the person that lived there after this as a pedophile. Now, keep in mind, I was only 6 years old at the time, and I didn't even know what the fuck the word even meant. So I asked them, "What the hell is what's a pedophile?" I didn't know, and they all just kind of looked at me and grinned and smirked, and then they just ignored my question, and then they started talking about where they're going to go to celebrate. And then they were talking about Darlene Dunham was telling her children after they drop me off, they're going to go out for Pizza Hut for a pizza. And now keep in mind, I'm only 6 years old. This is 1971. I didn't know what the hell a pizza was. I never went to a pizza place before. Keep in mind, we didn't have a TV. This is 1971. I don't even think there was Pizza Hut commercials back then because Pizza Hut didn't have any competition. They didn't have Domino's as a competition. It wasn't until like the late 70s when you started seeing Pizza Hut commercials and shit like that. This was 1971, okay? And I didn't even have a TV. So I wasn't familiar with commercials and things like that. I was familiar with hamburger joints and stuff like that because my parents always, when we went out to eat if we went to a restaurant, we would go to like A&W's restaurants, which was a restaurant that was relatively close to where we lived. And if we went to a burger joint, we would go to like a Burgerville, which is a local hamburger food chain here in Portland, Oregon. At the time, there wasn't many McDonald's or Burger Kings that I can recall back when I was a small kid, but there were Burgervilles, and we used to go to either restaurants or we would go to, if we went to a fast food place, it was usually a burger place. So I wasn't familiar with pizzas at the age of 6 in 1971. So I'm asking him, "What's a pizza?" I didn't know. See, you have to understand, I'm only 6 years old at this time. I didn't even know what the fuck a pizza was. And to my understanding, back in the early 70s, there was no Pizza Hut commercials because they didn't have any real competition. And I don't even think my own parents in the early 70s, I don't even think my own parents ever had a pizza. Pizzas didn't fully take off yet, so to speak, back then. When they started having commercials for pizzas, then that's when, pizza started becoming way, way more popular as people, learned and discovered them. But my own parents didn't even know what the hell a pizza was. And because of it, I didn't know, as a consequence. So I didn't even know what the hell a pizza was. So I was asking them what a pizza was, and they explained to me what a pizza was. And, on the walk back as they're taking me home. And I noticed that big, huge, honking, all-metal green camera Darlene Dunham was holding, and she was pulling out the photogenic photos out of that camera. And she was stuffing the photogenic photos into an envelope. And, I knew she was taking photos of us while we were picking up these candy bars. And I asked her if I could have one. Keep in mind, I'm only a 6-year-old kid. I knew she was taking photos of us. I didn't know what the purpose of those photos were, and she wasn't offering to tell me either. But I asked her if I could have one, and she told me, "No, I can't." And she was grinning and smirking, and she said, "These are special photos. Maybe another time." And that was her way of telling me no. And after she stuffed the envelopes, or the photos in the envelopes, I noticed, I was looking closely at this camera that Darlene Dunham had, and I'd never seen a camera like it before in my life, ever. My parents had normal, average cameras that, back in the day that you would get at from like a Sears or whatever, or we had normal cameras from the time period, just like any other normal, people would have. This camera that Darlene Dunham had was huge compared to a normal camera. I mean, it was massive. From my perspective, it looked massive. It was very reminiscent to those big, huge cameras you see in 1950s, 1960s detective movies where there's a crime scene and there's a dead body, and you see detectives and or news reporters taking those big honking cameras, and they're taking flashbulb photogenic photos of a crime scene. That's the type of a camera Darlene Dunham was holding, only it was more modern looking than the ones that you see in the 50s and the 60s movies, but it was of the same genre, meaning it was big and all metal, and it had the big flash. It had the big flash canister thing that's on top of the camera, and it's going upward, and it's got the half bulb thing where that's all shaped like metal, and inside is where the flash bulb would be. It was a big camera, and it was County Sheriff Green, Multnomah County Sheriff Green. And of course I didn't know what the hell a county sheriff officer was back at the time. And it had a big yellow insignia on it. And I didn't know what the hell that big yellow round insignia was. It was round, it was yellow. It was either yellow or gold. I leaned more towards it being yellow, looking back on it, but it might have been gold. But I leaned more towards it being just yellow, and I didn't know. I never forgot what it looked like, but I didn't know what the hell it represented. I found out years later what it was. It's the Multnomah County Sheriff's seal or insignia. I didn't know at the time what the hell it was. But I was fascinated by that camera because I'd never seen a camera like that before. I've seen cameras sort of like that on like old 50s and 60s movies, but I never seen one in person. And it was huge compared to the average normal cameras that my parents had at the time. And I was fascinated by it because it was all metal and it was big and impressive looking. I asked her, "Oh, gee, could I hold that for her?" Because I was curious. I didn't understand what was going on. I was a very curious and inquisitive, kid back then, and I always wanted to know new things and learn new things, and I was very inquisitive. So, and we're nearing getting. We're almost 2/3 of the way to where they're going to be dropping me off at home by this point. And she was telling me that when I asked if I could hold the camera for her, she said, "Oh no, she can't. She told me that she can't do that. She said this is not her camera. She said she borrowed it, and she has to return it." Now, I would like to point out the fact that I noticed that there was a green Multnomah County Sheriff's vehicle with the lights on top of the vehicle parked in front of that house where this county sheriff officer was. And I noticed the green vehicle with the lights on top of it. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it represented. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't even know what the hell a county sheriff officer even was. The only time back then, I had very little knowledge of law enforcement. You could have. I literally. So I knew what firemen looked like back then at the age of 6 because I had toys that represented firemen. So I had a general understanding of firemen. I didn't have anything that represented law enforcement. So my understanding of law enforcement was very vague, and I didn't understand, in other words, the things that I was witnessing. Now, I never forgot this day. I never forgot it. When Darlene Dunham and her children dropped me off at my house, they told me all those candy bars that I picked up, they said I could keep all those candy bars, and I said, oh, cool, great, thanks. And then I went into my house, and I'm holding the equivalent of about, I don't know, 6 or 8 candy bars, and I was happily munching on one of those damn candy bars. And as I walked through the door, and my mother said to me, where did you, my mother was shocked. She was shocked, astonished, and was shocked at the fact that I was holding about, I don't know, 6 to 8 candy bars. And she said, where did you get all those candy bars? And I'm like, now keep in mind, I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't even really know who the Dunham family were. I knew they were our neighbors. I knew that these were people that my mother somewhat knew, at least as our neighbors anyway. I knew virtually nothing about them. As a matter of fact, that is the day that Darlene Dunham introduced herself to me, and her children introduced themselves to me. So I really knew nothing about these people, and I didn't understand what happened and what was going on. I didn't realize that I was being used by law enforcement and their civilian sting operatives to frame a neighbor. I didn't realize this and had no understanding or comprehension of it. And keep in mind, after they got done tossing those candy bars at us, the Dunham family was openly referring to the person that lived there as a pedophile. And they were doing this in my presence immediately after we got done doing what we did there. And I didn't understand what that word pedophile even meant. Now, keep in mind, here was my perception of what happened. Here's my perception, my 6-year-old perception of what happened. Nice lady took me for a walk. Nice lady takes me to meet nice man. Nice man gives us candy bars, and then nice lady takes photos of it, and then nice lady takes me home again. That's how I perceived the events of that day, because I did not understand what I was witnessing. So when my mother asked me, where did you get all those candy bars? I answered that question based on my understanding of what happened. And what happened was this nice lady took me to see this nice man, and the nice man was giving us candy bars, and then the nice lady took me home again. And everybody in the Dunham family was referring to the person that lived there from this point as a pedophile. So I said to my mother, oh, they took me to see a nice pedophile. He gave them to us. That's what I said to my mother. Now, as far as I'm concerned, keep in mind, I didn't have any understanding of the word pedophile. I didn't even know what the hell it meant. They could have said, if they'd have said he was an astronaut, then I would have said to my mother, oh, they took me to meet a nice astronaut. He gave them to us. So, see, that was, keep that in mind. That's my perception of, at the time, of what I witnessed. So I don't understand what the word meant, but this is what the Dunham family were referring to this person as in my presence as they were taking me home. Now, you can imagine my mother's reaction to that. her jaw dropped to the floor. She was in shock at what I just said. And she said to me, she got very angry at this moment and was in shock, a mixture of anger and shock on her face, and she said, "Stay right there." And then she bolted out the door and she chased after the Dunham family. Now, keep this in mind, because I am a witness to the fact in the 70s that the county sheriffs and the Dunham's family used doubles and photogenic photos, and they used their civilian operatives, brats, to pose with doubles for the purpose of framing people. And I never forgotten what they did. I never even forgotten the conversations that were said. Because for me, you would think I would forget that day, and keep in mind I'm only 6 years old, but for me it was an unforgettable day. It's one of those weird days that a person just never forgets. If you ever had an extremely weird day where a whole bunch of either bad things happen, or a whole bunch of good things happen, or a whole bunch of things that might be good or bad, and you just don't understand what the hell is going on, but weird and unusual things are happening. Because of that, those kind of days tend to stick out in a person's memory. For me, I thought it was a good day, but at the same time, I was confused as to what was going on and didn't understand what was going on, and I was very confused about it. I didn't realize that they were committing crimes. I didn't realize that they were using me in a sting-off to frame some poor neighbor for crimes that these people themselves were staging. I didn't realize that. I was only 6 years old. You got to keep in mind, people nowadays, tend to be more sharper than people were back in the early 70s. Keep in mind, I didn't have a TV, so I didn't even have TV shows or commercials to learn from or anything. So there's a lot of average, things that people take for granted that back in the day, I knew nothing about. I knew nothing about law enforcement when I was 6 years old. Nothing. The only thing I knew about law enforcement was literally nothing, because we didn't even have TV. I didn't learn about law enforcement until we got TV. And I think when I first started getting interested in watching news segments and stuff like that, that's when I realized that it was a county sheriff officer that was in that home, because I saw on TV a few years later, I saw a county sheriff officer on TV, Multnomah County Sheriff Officer on TV, and I thought to myself, God damn, that's the same type of a uniform as the dude that was tossing candy bars at me when I was 6 years old. And I think it was probably a year or two later when I got old enough to where I was taking an interest in news, and I think I was probably 10 or 11 or 12 years old, I think. And I noticed the Multnomah County Sheriff's insignia on TV. I don't remember what the hell it was. It was just something had something to do with, it was something on the news, and it had something to do with the county sheriffs, and for whatever reason they showed the Multnomah County Sheriff's insignia, and I'm like, oh my God, that's the same fucking insignia that was on that goddamn camera that Darlene Dunham was using back in '71. And piecing together what happened was difficult for me, because I simply had no understanding of what I witnessed, and nobody ever explained to me what that was all about, and nobody ever questioned me about it. So, and I didn't realize these people were committing a crime, so, I didn't realize there was a problem. If I'd have realized that these people were committing crimes, I would have explained what they did to my parents, but I didn't realize, as far as I knew, my mother, my 6-year-old perception at the time was, my mother knew that Darlene Dunham was taking me to this place.
and approved of whatever the hell this is, and she must understand, because she didn't seem to have a problem with Darlene Dunham taking me to this place. When my mother bolted out the door to go after the Dunham family, I have to assume that the county sheriff officer that was inside that home, he must have left the home shortly after we left, and he got in his county sheriff vehicle and he drove to the Dunham's house, which is like 2 houses away from ours. And when my mother chased after the Dunhams to find out what the hell is going on, why did a pedophile give her son, candy bars and shit like that, I'm going to have to assume that the county sheriff officer was at the Dunham's house to pick up the photogenic photos and his camera. And that this is the circumstances in which my mother was confronting them. Now, keep in mind, I'm only 6 years old. My mother went to question the Dunhams, and to the best of my knowledge, based on my mother's reaction when she came back from confronting the Dunhams, I have to assume that they told her some sort of a lie that she seemed satisfied with, or they gave her some sort of a lying explanation that made sense to her, and I'm under the impression that they told my mother to not question me about it. So when my mother came home, she seemed satisfied with whatever answer they gave her, and she didn't question me about what happened. I wish to God she did. I wish to God that she would have questioned me. She would have found out, if she'd have questioned me, she would have found out that they were framing a neighbor. I was only 6 years old at the time, and based on my limited understanding of the time period, I had, so let's put it this way, I had more than enough information that if an adult questioned me, they would have found out that they were framing a neighbor. If somebody would have questioned me. But nobody questioned me about it. And because of my limited 6-year-old perception of nice lady takes me for a walk, nice lady takes me to see nice man gives us candy bars, nice lady takes photos of it, and then nice lady takes me home again. Based on that limited perception that I had of the events, I didn't think anything, of it, really, in the sense that I didn't think they were criminals. I didn't realize that they were framing people. I had no fucking clue. I was completely clueless. And nobody questioned me. But keep in mind, I never forgot this day. I never forgot the events. I never even forgot the conversations we had, because it was essentially my introduction day to the Dunham's family, and it was such a weird day that for me it was unforgettable. It stuck in my memory, because one of the reasons I can't explain why it stuck in my memory, other than the fact that if you've ever had a special day where something special, something that completely different happens, and it's just so far out of the norm that it just becomes an unforgettable event, that would be the best way for me to describe it. But I can remember that day clearly. And I even remember the conversations, because I never forgot it, because it was such a weird day. I was so confused. I didn't understand what the hell was going on. And I didn't realize that I didn't know that they were doing bad things. I didn't, it's hard to explain. You have to understand that my understanding of crime at the time was virtually nil. I had a basic understanding of right and wrong, but covert crimes I knew absolutely nothing about, nothing. And in essence, they were committing covert crimes. They were quite literally staging crimes for the purpose of blaming the person that lived there. and they were using the person's home as their staging for that event. And it was a county sheriff officer that broke into that home and was acting as a double of the person that lived there. I didn't find out until years later, until about, I think I was around 10 when I found out that the person that lived there was charged as a pedophile. And keep in mind, I don't think I was till like 10 years old, 11 years old when I even figured out what the hell a pedophile was. When I was a small kid growing up, nobody bantered that word around like, my understanding of those type of words were very limited. I relatively lived, in a sense, a sheltered life, and in a sense that, I wasn't around generally bad people that use such wording on a regular basis. My mother never even explained to me what that word meant. Nobody ever explained to me what that word meant. So I didn't even know. It took basically age and wisdom, to discover the stuff basically on my own. And I basically pieced together the puzzles of that day over a long period of time. I pieced it together well before I was an adult, but, full understanding didn't occur until I was probably around 10 to 12, somewhere in that area. I think full understanding sort of kicked in when I was around 10, but there was a lot of denial at the same time because I didn't want to really actually believe that they were framing the person that lived there. Because I didn't want, I was in shock. There was a lot of shock in the realization of it, and a lot of denial, and a lot of, what the hell do I do about this? Suffice it to say, I had prior knowledge that the county sheriffs in this town are corrupt, and that they do in fact stage and commit crimes themselves for the purpose of framing others. So when they recruited my wife and her side of the family in 1999 into affairs and into sting operations, I became a target of the county sheriffs. And in essence, they made a decision they were going to set me up as a pedo. And since they had my wife and her side of the family on board with it, they were quite literally paying my wife and her sisters to turn my yard into a playground with very expensive swimming pools, more than one swimming pool, each costing over $350 each, and a very large trampoline, which also cost at least $350. They in essence spent around over $1,000 on paraphernalia to put in literally in my yard for the purpose of making my yard look like a playground. And right after they did this, they brought in a double. And they brought in the Dunham family. Kurt Dunham, who was one of the neighbor kids that Darlene Dunham, is Darlene Dunham's son. He moved a couple of blocks away from where I live in 1999. And he basically moved into the neighborhood a couple blocks from my home right before they put the double on my property. And I'm under the belief that they thought that I either completely forgot what they did in 71 and that they were having fun hinting at it, because Kurt Dunham actually made a visit to my home in 1999 while the county sheriffs were right next door and were trying to hide it from me. And he wanted me to specifically know that he moved into the neighborhood
a couple blocks away. And it was right after this the county sheriff put a double on my property. So basically the county sheriffs were using the same tactics generally in 1999 to frame me as a pedophile as they were using in 1971 to frame a neighbor as a pedophile, of which I'm a witness to. And I think they were having fun hinting at it. They didn't realize that I already knew. As a matter of fact, I deliberately gave them the impression that I didn't know. And the reason why was because I feared for my safety. I feared for my own family's safety. Because these are bad people. They're poisoners, for one thing. They poison off people. And I feared for my family's safety because of this. They were having fun, essentially, surrounding me with their operatives. They already had my wife and her side of the family on board with this shit. So they pretty much had control of my own property. They broke into my home. They bugged my home. They had my wife and her side of the family on board with it. And they were directing their brats to perform for the county sheriff's video surveillance. They quite literally took, out of sheer numbers, they quite literally took control of my property and were staging events behind my back and staging events in such a way where they were trying to set me up and make me look like a bad guy. And I had more information than they thought I had. They thought I was completely clueless, and I wasn't. It's like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me for letting you, kind of a thing. So when they were targeting me in 1999, I picked up on it immediately. Immediately, I was recognizing all the signs of it. I mean, for me, it was just instant recognition. I knew instantly I was being set up. I already knew my wife was cheating on me when she was working at the county jail kitchen. I suspected that she was having an affair with somebody in law enforcement. My guard is already up, and I'm not confiding in her nor in any member of her side of the family. I was already under the belief that divorce is more than likely going to happen because she's cheating and she obviously doesn't love me anymore, and all the signs of her having an affair were there. I had every reason to believe it was with somebody in law enforcement. So when the day arrived when my wife quit her job at the county jail kitchen, this was the day that my wife and everybody on her side of the family were celebrating the county sheriff's decision to frame me. And they were celebrating right in front of my face. And I specifically asked them, gee, what do you guys, they all showed up on, but keep in mind, they all showed up on my property, my apartment. My wife's sister, and my wife's sister's nephew, and my wife's mother, and my wife's father. They all showed up that day on my property, the day my wife quit. And they were all celebrating something in my presence on my property. And I specifically asked them, gee, what are you guys all celebrating? And they were grinning at me and smirking at me, and they started hinting at it. And they were hinting in a malicious manner where they're essentially making it known that they're my enemies and that shit's going on and that it's going to fuck me over, and they were having fun hinting at it. So basically, everybody on my wife's side of the family was on board with this conspiracy to set my ass up. And we're on board with the county sheriff's decision to set me up. And they were celebrating it that day. And they were all hinting at it, and they were all implying at it. And
for whatever reason, my wife's mother, her name is Donna Miner, she forgot that I was standing there, and she just blurted it out.